All right, hi everyone. Welcome to our Creativity and Your Wellbeing Homemade Gifts class number 2. Nicole did the first class, which is available on our virtual programs page. It's been recorded, and you can get the link to the instruction sheet if you want to try those crafts on your own. But today we're doing a few more homemade gifts, and we're going to make first these reusable hand warmers that are a really great sewing project for beginners. I consider myself kind of a beginner with sewing. It's not my favorite thing to do, but it's really handy, and it is kind of relaxing actually. So we're going to make these. We're going to make some birdseed ornaments, and then we're also going to make some stovetop potpourri. So we're going to start with the hand warmers, and basically what you'll need is cotton fleece fabric, because you want something soft because they're meant to warm your hands. So it's nice to have something that has a nice soft feel. Here's a couple of versions I made. These ones are a little bit bigger. And then today I'm going to show you how to make a smaller one, just a little quicker. So I'm also going to show you how to do them by hand if you don't have a sewing machine. But if you are starting to get into sewing, you can find sewing machines for really cheap. I think I got this one for $45, and it's very small and basic, but it works well enough to do some basic stitches. So what we're going to do is basically cut out some fabric and sew 2 of the side or 3 of the sides, fill it with just plain uncooked white rice, and then we're going to sew it shut. So when you give this as a gift, you can give people instructions, just microwave it for about 30 seconds. And it'll stay warm for, I don't know, 20 minutes or so. So you can hold it in your hand or put it in your pocket. So since it's something that we're going to microwave, you want to make sure that we're just using cotton fabric. There's no, metal decorative string or anything in it. And we want to make sure that the string we're using isn't metallic either. And we're just going to make kind of a small one. And you don't really have to measure it. That's why this is such a good beginner project, because it doesn't really have to be exact. But this is one that I made last week, so I'm just going to make one to match this. And this one I did 3 inches by 4 inches. And when you sew it, it's going to be smaller because you're sewing 2 of the sides together. So it'll end up being about that size. The nice thing about this fabric is actually it's plaid, so it has lines on it already. So I know that this is, from what I did earlier, 3 inches by about 4 inches. So I just need to get to the middle of here. So I'm not going to be super exact, but we do want them to be about the same shape and size. And actually, I'm going to show you a different way. Okay, so you need 2 pieces of fabric, right? Because you're going to sew it together. So in order to reduce the amount of sewing that you do, you can actually just cut this 8 inches long and fold it in half. And that's one less side that you have to sew together. So I'm going to cut it to right there. So if you're just joining, we're cutting out our fabric for the reusable hand warmers, and you can choose whatever shape and size you'd like, but I'm going to do a 3 by 4 inch shape, but I'm doing 3 by 8 inches and then just folding it in half. Okay, so once you have your fabric cut out, you can set that aside. And whenever you sew, you pretty much always put the right sides together, because you want the seams to be on the inside, and then we're going to turn it inside out. So you can see how it'll become a little smaller as we sew it all together. All right, so first I'm going to show you how to hand sew this, and all you really need is a needle and thread. You kind of want to match your thread to the fabric, but to help you see it better, I'm going to actually use black thread on this kind of white background, even though the fabric itself is blue and white. On the other one, I used the white thread, which doesn't completely match either, but I'm not too worried about it. These really don't have to look perfect. People are pretty much going to put them in their pockets. So this, again, is a great project if you're a beginner at sewing and just kind of learning how to get the hang of it. Okay, so we need a needle and thread. If you want, you can use a thimble to protect your finger, or just try to be really careful. But this is just a little sewing kit that I have that has all the basics in it. All right, so the hardest part of sewing is always threading the needle, right? So what I usually like to do is just snip off the end to make sure that I'm getting rid of anything that's frayed. And then you can use water, or some people even lick it to make it a little bit, hold it together better so you can get it through the eye of the needle. But I find often just snipping it is enough. But let's see if I have one in here. There's also this thing called a needle threader. And it looks like this. See that. So what you do is you stick this through the needle. Let me show you. I think I usually don't use these, but you stick this through the needle. It's a little bit easier. And then it has a little hole in it. I don't know if you can see on either of these cameras. And then you stick the thread through that hole, and then you pull it through. It just makes it a little bit easier if you have a hard time seeing those teeny tiny details. And what we're going to do is basically kind of use double thread here. So I'm pulling it all the way through and basically doubling the length. And you want it to be a manageable length. And since we're going to basically sew two sides, it doesn't have to be terribly long, but it does need to be longer than the side that we're sewing, because we're going to do a back stitch, which is nice and strong. And that basically means that you're overlapping a little bit. So you need it to be longer than what you're actually sewing. But that should be plenty long. I'll leave it extra long just to make sure. Okay, so let me just go ahead and bring the camera closer. Okay. So I have the needle threaded, and I'm going to tie a knot at the end. And we want it to be nice and tight, so we're going to double knot it. And if you have a sewing machine, I'm going to show you how to do this as well. But if you have sewn before, you can probably imagine what we're going to do, because it's pretty basic. But first, let's start with the hand sewing. Okay, so we have our needle threaded, and we have a knot at the end. So you're going to fold your fabric in half with the right side touching each other. Or you can do two pieces of fabric and again, have them together. So maybe you want to do a shape like a heart or a circle, or I've even seen some online that are shaped like dogs or something cute. So you can do that, but we're just going to start with a basic square. So we want a stitch to be nice and tight for this, because we're filling it with little grains of white rice. So if it's too loose, then you might give this to someone and it'll break, and then they're going to spill rice everywhere. So we don't want that. So what you're going to do for the back stitch, and I tried to include some instructions on the instruction sheet about the stitch in particular, but you're basically going to come up through the fabric, and you want to be, about a 1/4 inch from the edge, and pull it through. And then we're going to go backwards and come back up. So these are just a little stitch, and it's probably it's kind of hard to explain and hard to show on here. But basically what you're doing once you get started, and we can go through it a few times just to make sure. nice and tight. Okay, so basically once you get started, you're gonna go back to the end of the last stitch and go down. And oops, come back up. Sorry, I have my two different computers here. And we're basically overlapping on the back side. I don't know if you can really see this. So on the back, we're gonna have a straight line, and then we're gonna have another straight line on the front. So I'm going back to where my last stitch ended, and then past where I had put that in the needle before. So it's gonna look like, it's gonna look a little neater on the side that's facing you versus the side on the back. But again, this is gonna be on the inside. We're only gonna have one seam showing on the outside. So if you can see that, I'm going back to this where this last stitch went under. And then I'm going just past where the last one went back through. And then out. So it's basically overlapping on the back. Does that make sense? If anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. So we're just going to keep going like this. So this is the stitch that I would use for this because it's a lot stronger than what's called a running stitch, which is where you just kind of go up and down, up and down. This, again, we need it to be strong because we need it to hold on to the rice. And sometimes it'll kind of catch, so you just have to pull it out and sometimes pull the strings individually if it gets kind of knotted. And then if you want to make this extra strong, it's a little bit more time consuming, but you can go back and do this again. Okay, so there's a question. Are you going back in the same hole the previous stitch? Okay, so you can see a kind of a little running line here. So here's where the thread came out with the last one. So I'm actually going backwards past where it came out, lined up with where the you can see the last stitch.
Can you shift your hand slightly to the left because we're seeing like your thumb there? Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so back to where the last stitch came out and a little bit past where that thread is. So essentially what we're doing is creating this overlapping effect on the back side. So maybe you can see it looks like there's a whole lot of thread, and that's because they're all overlapping. So, you know, it's a little time consuming, but once you get the hang of it, it does become kind of therapeutic and mindless. But you just need to watch a good video with somebody who can show you how to do it. And I'm maybe not the best, so maybe you'll find something on YouTube or read the printed instructions, and maybe that'll make sense. Depends on, you know, your learning style. So just keep going with that until you get to the end. And then once you get to the end, you'll start it again on the other side. And we want to leave one side open. Okay. So yeah, sometimes the thread gets stuck and you just have to keep going. And at first, you know what, it's probably going to look a little messy, and that's totally fine. This is a stitch that they sometimes use in embroidery. So some people are really good at it and make it look really nice and neat. But, you know, eventually, maybe if you find that you enjoy this, maybe you would try it on a sewing machine and see how much easier it is and how quickly you can get these done. Okay, so just keep going if that's what you're doing. Oops, I got a big knot there. But since we don't have a ton of time and I want to make sure that I'm showing you how to do it on a sewing machine if you have one, then I'm going to show you that on the other side. And I just got a big, huge knot there. I'll have to work out later. Okay, so if you're using a sewing machine, I'll show you how to stitch it on the other side here. See if this works with the overhead camera. I have to rearrange it a little bit. Okay. So we want to use just kind of a straight stitch on this one. What I should also mention is that this back stitch that we're doing by hand is basically the same thing that the sewing machine can do. So I'm not going to take the time to show you how to set up the sewing machine, but hopefully you have it already set up where you have the thread on top and the bobbin on the bottom. And mine is already loaded with white thread, so I'm just going to show you how to do that. Okay, so we also want to have like a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So the needle is here. So we want it to be just inside about 1/4 inch. So you're going to put the foot down. A little pedal. And we're going to stitch forward a couple of stitches. I usually like to start it with the hand crank to make sure that it doesn't come unthreaded. Okay, so a couple of stitches, and then you should have a button that goes backwards. So you hold it down, and you're basically reinforcing that first stitch. And then you're going to go forward until you get to the end. And then once you get to the end there, you're going to do the same thing, go backwards a couple of stitches, and then forward. So again, you're reinforcing the end so it doesn't come unthreaded. And then you'll just snip off these ends. Oops. So you can see that. We'll snip off the ends. I like to use kitchen shears when I sew or when I cut fabric and string. I find them to be sharper than the regular old craft scissors that I have. Okay, so this doesn't normally happen to me. I ended up with a huge knot in my hand sewn part. So I can't quite show you yet how to finish this. Let's see if we can work it out. So if you are using the sewing machine, just keep going and sew together 2 ends so that you form basically a pocket. And then if you're hand sewing, just keep going. Hopefully you don't have a knot like I do. That's getting you all messed up here. See if I can just pull it through. There we go. Just use brute force. Okay. So let me see if I can quickly go through this so I can keep us moving here. I don't think this thread likes me. All right. Hopefully you can see that. And I do still have a little knot, but that's okay. We'll just keep going. So we're overlapping everything here, starting at the end of the last stitch, going past where the thread comes back out, and then back down. And as you get more comfortable with it, you can pick up the pace a little bit. And just remember this side, it really doesn't have to be perfect. Even if it's not a straight line, it doesn't really matter that much because it'll be on the inside. But if you find it helpful, you could draw a line on the inside. And what I do sometimes, especially if it's a darker fabric, is I'll take a bar of soap especially one I've already kind of used most of it, so it's kind of flat. And I'll use that to mark on the fabric what my line is. So it's easier to follow a straight line. Okay. So we're almost done here. Sorry, I'm going to leave it a little messy just in the interest of time. But yeah, this is, again, a good beginner sewing project because it's pretty small. It's just doing straight lines, and it doesn't have to be perfect. But, you know, if you want to try some other sewing projects, some things that I've made, and I consider myself kind of a beginner, are reusable makeup wipes that are kind of a similar design, really. Or face masks. That's kind of how I learned how to sew, really. I mean, I remember doing home ec classes in middle school. So here I was as an adult trying to remember how to use the sewing machine from those classes, but it came in really handy with the pandemic, trying to make masks back when they were kind of hard to find. Okay, so once you get to the end, you can just go through a couple of times, or you can go through and kind of make a loop. And then you basically tie a knot by pulling the needle through that loop. So you can do that a couple of times and it'll leave you a nice, strong knot at the end. Okay. So it's not pretty, but it works. And just snip that off. So much for kitchen shears being sharper than regular scissors. Maybe these are not my good ones. Okay. So you basically have a pocket here. It's probably hard to tell because the one on the sewing machine, I used white thread. So now we're going to turn it inside out. We have a little pouch. So you can use your finger, or maybe you can, use a chopstick or something to poke out the corners a little bit. So we have a little pouch here. So now we're going to fill it with rice. So on the instructions, I said you could use a funnel if you want, or you can just spoon it in. So you want to fill it about 2/3 full. So maybe to make it easier, fold it over a little bit. About 2/3 full, because we do need to leave a little bit of room to sew it shut. I'm dropping a few kernels, but that's okay if they're hitting the table. We're not going to eat this rice. Okay. Let's see. I want this to be about even with my other one, so I need to put a little more rice. And if you want to use a funnel, but you don't have one, you could just kind of roll up a piece of paper and it'll basically form a funnel. Okay, that's probably good. So now we have our little pouch. It's about even with the other one. So now we have a raw edge at the top here, right? So, oh no, I just dropped it. Let me scoop that in real quick. Sorry about that. Okay. I'll vacuum later. All right, so what you're gonna do is just kind of fold in these raw edges so that the raw edge is on the inside. And then whether you're hand sewing or using the sewing machine, we're just gonna sew that together. And since I have a plaid pattern here, I can kind of use that as a guide to tell where it's, make sure that it's even and straight. So does that make sense? Fold the raw edges inside so that they're hidden, and then we're going to sew it shut. So you're going to do the same thing if you're using the hand stitch method. You do the back stitch, but I'll show you on the sewing machine just in the interest of time. So make sure you lift up your needle, put the foot down. So it's about a 1/4 inch from the edge. I like to do the first 1 or 2 stitches with the hand crank. So you crank it towards you, and that'll get it going. It's a little thick, so sometimes it has a hard time. And make sure you go backwards to reinforce it. And then forward. It's a little thick, so I had to push it through a little bit. I'm going to make sure that's straight. And when you get to the end, reinforce the stitch by going backwards. And then forward all the way through. Lift up the foot. And then trim the thread. So we'll also have to trim the thread on the other end. So there you have a very basic, beginner-friendly sewing project. Little reusable hand warmers. Again, pop them in the microwave about 30 seconds and take them outside with you on a cold day. All right, so let's move on. We'll try to come back to that if we have time at the end, if anybody has more questions. So the next thing that we're going to make are the birdseed ornaments. So here's one that I made a couple weeks ago. The idea is that you're just adding birdseed and enough stuff to hold it together, and then you make it in a cool little shape, and you can hang it up on a tree. So what you'll need for this is some birdseed. Arrange everything here. We're going to use flour, corn syrup, and water to hold it together. And then you'll need a bowl, some measuring cups and spoons, and then some cookie cutters. So I actually got the cookie cutters at this place in the Temescal neighborhood called I think it's called the East Bay Depot for Creative Reuse, something like that. They were 3 for $1, and I just got some funky little shapes. So if you don't have them, that's a really affordable place to get them. So let me grab the recipe here. We need just 1 second, I have it on the other computer. Okay, so first you're going to line a baking sheet, or I'm just going to use a cutting board since we're not cooking this or anything, with wax paper or a silicone baking mat, so you don't want it to stick. And then we're going to mix everything in the bowl. So you're going to need 3/4 cup of just white all-purpose flour, 1/2 cup of water, and 3 tablespoons of corn syrup. First, let's start with the flour. 3/4 cup. And this doesn't have to be exact like baking. This is just kind of creating a glue to hold it all together. And then 1/2 cup of water. And I've seen other recipes where they use gelatin, but I wanted to do something that, you know, maybe if you're vegetarian, don't want to use gelatin, then these are also ingredients that you may be more likely to have. You can also use agar, which I did try to use, but I tried cutting the recipe in half, and I think I didn't have quite enough and it didn't hold together. So I haven't tried it again since then, but that's an option too. So these are kind of coated with white, but it almost looks kind of snowy and holiday-like. So I didn't mind that effect. So 3 tablespoons of corn syrup, some sticky stuff, which is exactly why we're using it. So 3/4 cup flour, 1/2 cup water, 3 tablespoons of corn syrup. And then we're going to mix that together, and then we're going to add 4 cups of birdseed. So you'll see this will form like a paste. And then, we're just going to basically let them sit out and harden. Quite a bit. So, sorry, you can recipe in half if you don't want to use too much. 4 cups of this. So the idea is that, you can use these to feed the birds. They are kind of decorative too. So if you, have a Christmas tree, you could hang them on there. But I'll show you so that you can hang them outside. We're gonna do some of them we're gonna poke a hole in it so you can weave a string through it and hang it on a tree. I happen to get this candy cane shape, which I found you can just hang these directly on a branch. And when I tried that, I did witness it being grabbed off by a squirrel. So if you don't tie it to the tree, then they might be easier to steal. So, maybe better to tie it. But one thing that I read from some of the recipes that I saw online is that you want to make sure that if you're using this yourself or giving it as a gift, whoever hangs it on the tree hangs it on a branch where there's another branch right below. Because if you hang it and there's nothing below, the birds will have to try to fly in place to eat the seed, and they can't really do that. They'll get worn out. So make it easier for them and make sure it's on a branch where they can actually sit down while they eat. Okay, so it's going to look kind of like this. It's going to be like sticking together, but it's not going to be quite as white until it hardens. So there's our mixture. And I've seen various ways to do this online. I think the easiest one is to spoon it right into the, or even just use your hands to spoon it into the cookie cutter and push it down. Other methods I've seen where you put this down on the parchment paper or the wax paper, whatever you're using first, and then you push the cookie cutters in, but that was kind of difficult to do, especially when you have big seeds like these black, I think, sunflower seeds. And then you just end up with a lot of extra, that's not in any particular shape. So you can make them pretty thick if you'd want. I would say like 3/4 inch or 1/2 inch, and then just press it down into the cookie cutter nice and firm so that it holds together. Okay, and then some of the recipes I saw or instructions said to leave it to harden. And when I tried that myself, I could not get them out of the cookie cutter without breaking it. So I find it easier just to really gently hold it down as you loosen the cookie cutter. And then you can also reuse it, because with the amount of mixture that we have, you'd need, a dozen cookie cutters. So these little extra pieces, I don't know if you can even see them on the camera, they'll kind of come off later. So we're just going to repeat that until we get through all the mixture. And in the interest of time, I won't go through the entire bowl, but we'll try a different shape, one that maybe I can poke a hole in. So I like to fill them pretty much all the way to the top. So I think if they're too thin, then you risk them breaking.
Kim, how long does it take to harden?
What the instructions say, it might be, I think I left them for a day or so, but I think it can be as quick as about 8 hours. You know, if you leave them somewhere nice and warm. Okay, so for this one, I want to poke a hole in it so that I can run a string through it and hang it up. So you can use something like a chopstick or a paintbrush and just stick the chopstick in and kind of rotate around, make little circles while it's still in the cookie cutter so it holds the shape. And then again, gently pull up on the cookie cutter while you push down on the mixture. And then it will hold that shape. So it's good to use simpler shapes if you can, because you know the mixture is kind of rough. So if it has a lot of details, they're going to get lost with all the seeds. So that's why I like to use a simple shape like a candy cane. So again, yeah, just let them sit, and then eventually as they dry, they'll look a little bit whiter, and then they'll hold together. And I made this a couple of weeks ago, and you know, there's no mold or anything. It's nice and dry, and it's holding its shape really well. So if you do make these now and you want to give them away in December, then you know, that should be fine. Okay, so I'm going to go rinse my hand and come right back. Okay, so the last thing we're gonna do, I think, is fortunately the easiest one. And we are going to make some stovetop potpourri. So for this, you can use different spices. I'm just going to use cloves and cinnamon, kind of classic holiday spices. And then we're going to make some orange peel, and that's kind of what I'm most excited to show you. Let me grab this right here. And we're also going to use a pine sprig, which is optional and a little hard to find, I think, here in the Bay Area. But I did go, I'll show you what I have actually. I went hiking in Redwood Regional Park this weekend. I just found a few little evergreen sprigs, and they don't really have a strong smell, but they do look kind of nice. So you might be able to find something like this in your yard or neighborhood, or if you go hiking. But if you want to add that really like authentic pine tree smell, my recommendation is maybe try going to a place where they sell Christmas trees, and maybe they have some sprigs that fell on the ground, because those will probably be a little bit more fragrant. Or if you have a Christmas tree yourself, maybe you can snip off a few branches. But I was fortunate enough a couple weeks ago to be gifted this bag of balsam fir needles kind of randomly, and it worked out perfectly for this. And it smells so much stronger than the other one. So I've seen this online. I think I linked it in the email that I sent. They sell it through Etsy and other websites. But again, it's optional. You don't have to do the pine. But first, let me show you the orange peel. So I like this idea because it's something that you would just throw away if you eat an orange. But now we can actually repurpose it. So you can use this in cooking, or you can use it just for the smell. And basically what you want to do, here's some that I made last week. It's really easy. You just take a sharp vegetable peeler and peel strips and then set them on a plate. So since we're not eating it, oh, and you can smell it already. Since we're not eating it, it's not as big of a deal. But if you're going to eat the orange peel, like make candied orange peel, or you know, put the zest in something, or you can even grind it up and put it in, make like a citrus salt or make a seasoning blend. You want to get rid of the white part because that's bitter. The pith is the bitter part, and that goes for other types of citrus too. So you can do this with lemons, oranges, limes, grapefruit, whatever you'd like. So we just want to spread out the peels so that they aren't overlapping, so that they can dry. And, you know, it's a little early in the season for oranges right now, but I've been able to find, conventional oranges. But if you are going to make use zest that you're going to eat, I would recommend using organic, since the outside is often where they spray a lot of the pesticides and things. But this one, you know, since we're not eating it, it's not as big of a deal, but I think as it gets a little closer to winter, it'll be a little bit easier to find organic citrus, or maybe you know somebody who grows it or has a tree in their yard. So then, you know, you can just eat this orange as usual. And then we have this that maybe you're going to throw away or compost, and we can actually reuse it. So this does take a little while to dry, about 2 or 3 days. So just put it in a warm place and just let it sit. If you have a dehydrator, you could use that. You can also dry it out in the oven, but I like the passive way that, you know, takes a little bit longer, but if you're not in a rush, then it's really easy. You can also buy dried orange peel, especially like orange slices. They look really pretty, but they're a little bit more expensive, and you can make them yourself. But I find that, you know, doing it this way with just the peel is just so easy, and then there's no waste. So then what we're gonna do is we're gonna use these spices and some jars. So this is really cheap to make, especially if you get the pine sprigs for free. You use orange peel that you were just going to throw away anyway, and then just a few spices and some old jars that you can repurpose that are saved from other things. You know, this was probably some kind of sauce or something. So in each jar, the amounts don't have to be really that specific, but the clove scent is pretty strong, so you probably don't want to overdo the cloves. So I'm just going to eyeball it and do about a teaspoon, maybe a little less than a teaspoon. That's probably like 20, 25 cloves. Place that in a jar. And if you buy the spices in bulk, a lot of times they're much cheaper. I don't remember how full this jar was, but this jar was $2. However full, you know, maybe it was half full or something. That's a lot of cloves. It's hard to use that many cloves. I especially find that to be true for cinnamon sticks. These are $8 a pound, which might sound like a lot, but they're really lightweight. So I think this jar was pretty much full for $5, but I've seen them sold in the little tiny jars for $5, $6, $7, $8. So you can get a whole lot more when you buy it in bulk. Maybe you can add 2 cinnamon sticks if you want. And then I'm just going to throw in a few pieces of orange peel, maybe 6 or so. And then just for looks, we'll do a little pine sprig. But since I happen to have it for the smell, I'm going to throw in some of these balsam fir needles that are so fragrant. They smell so nice. I happen to have a little measuring scoop here, so we'll do probably about 2 or 3 tablespoons. But you can throw in other spices if you'd like, you know, star anise or cardamom, or maybe some essential oils. So you just have a little jar like this. Maybe you can see on the video. Or you could give it in a bag and make it cute and festive, decorate the jar however you'd like. And basically, the instructions for using it are to put it in a pot with plenty of water, and then just simmer it, and it'll really bring out the smells. And then just make sure that whoever's using it keeps adding water as needed so it doesn't burn. So you do have to keep an eye on it, but it's, you know, again, really low waste and has a really nice smell. And then when they're done, they can just drain it and compost whatever is left over. So that's everything that we're making. We have a few minutes left, so I'll open it up to questions, and maybe I'll keep going with the birdseed ornaments if possible. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or let me know if I missed any in the chat. And then we'll turn off the recording a couple minutes early if you want to unmute yourself and ask questions, but don't want to be on the recording. Are there any questions? And if you need other holiday gift ideas, then again, Nicole's class was last month and the recording is online. We also have our homemade holiday treats class coming up. That's actually edible things in the beginning of December. And we have been doing that class for years now. So there's tons of recipes on our website if you need any ideas. There's a question, was the potpourri for one-time use? And yes, it is. So if you want to give someone more, maybe just add more to the jar and say, you know, use half of it, or individually package it. Will flannel work for the hand warmers? Yes, I recommend using flannel fabric because it's nice and soft. All right, I'll go ahead and stop the recording, but after I do that, feel free to unmute yourself to ask questions or say hi or whatever you'd like.